The patrol ship drifted through the quiet stretch of space that most travelers ignored. Out here, nothing exciting usually happened. So when the Galactic crew detected a small human vessel sitting still near the border of regulated space, they treated it like just another routine check. Human ships passed through this region often enough. Most of the time, they were simple science teams or long-range explorers testing new tools. The Galactic had never taken humans seriously. In their eyes, humans were just another young species trying too hard to look important. From the patrol deck, the officers watched the small human vessel on their screens. It was smooth, silver-white, and shaped like a narrow oval. It looked clean but plain, with no visible weapons and no sign of damage. To the Galactic crew, that almost made it more suspicious. Why would any ship drift so silently without sending a signal? Their commander ordered a basic scan. The crew activated the pylons that stretched from their hull like thin metal spears. A soft hum filled the patrol ship as the sensors locked onto the human vessel. The process was automatic. They had scanned hundreds of ships in the past year alone. The first few seconds brought nothing but static. The technician in charge frowned and tapped the side of his console, as if a physical touch would help the data flow correctly. It didn't. The screen flickered once, then reset the reading. He muttered to himself, thinking it was probably just another human device interfering with their sensors. Humans had a habit of inventing tools that didn't follow any consistent rules. Their machines were famous for being messy, chaotic, and unpredictable. The commander asked for an update. The technician replied that the scan was returning mixed data. One moment the ship appeared empty, showing no life forms and almost no power. The next second the reading changed, showing high internal activity, as if a full crew were moving around inside. The temperature readings shifted wildly too. Sometimes the vessel looked warm enough to support several passengers. Other times, the system claimed the ship was colder than open space. This inconsistency annoyed the commander. He didn't believe in glitches. In his view, machines only malfunctioned when someone had designed them poorly. And in his mind, humans were certainly capable of that. He ordered the technician to keep trying. The patrol ship had a duty to document every unknown detail, especially when it involved human experiments. Humans had a reputation for testing strange prototypes far away from their own borders. On the large screen at the front of the room, the drifting vessel looked harmless. Its lights were dim but steady. No movement. No distress signals. No beacons. Just a quiet ship waiting in silence. It gave the impression of peace, almost as if it were asleep. Still, the commander refused to let it pass without a full report. He authorized a deep scan, which meant the sensors would not only read the surface, but also try to map the interior layout. This type of scan was thorough, almost intrusive, meant to reveal any hidden cargo or dangerous energy sources. The moment the deep scan began, the patrol ship's hum changed into a louder vibration that spread through every hallway. Several crew members instinctively looked up from their work. They were used to the feeling, but this time something about the sound seemed different. It felt uneven, almost strained, like the machinery was pushing harder than usual. Inside the scan room, the data screen began shifting faster than the technician could follow. Graphs and lines appeared only to vanish a heartbeat later. Numbers didn't stay consistent. The reading of the ship's mass changed every 2 seconds, swinging between small civilian craft and something much larger. The technician whispered in confusion, wondering if the human vessel was equipped with some type of experimental shielding. The commander, growing impatient, stepped closer. "Run the calibration again," he said. The technician obeyed, his fingers moving quickly across the panel. But when the calibration sequence activated, the lights overhead flickered. Several screens momentarily went dark before rebooting themselves. That was the first real sign that something unusual was happening. The patrol ship's crew exchanged uneasy glances. Their systems had never reacted so strongly to a simple scan. The technician tried the calibration again, this time slower, making sure every protocol was followed correctly. Yet the moment the scan recommenced, the same flicker rolled through the ship. Someone on the deck wondered aloud if the human vessel could be broadcasting a defensive field. But the commander rejected the idea. He said humans didn't have the technology for something like that. Their ships were sturdy, yes, but nothing about them had ever been dangerous to scan. They had scanned dozens before without any complications. Another officer suggested the drifting vessel might be abandoned and its systems left running in an unstable mode. That explanation sounded more believable. A malfunctioning ship could easily produce strange signals. The crew began leaning toward that guess, which made them more comfortable. A broken human vessel was far less intimidating than some unknown new technology. But if the ship was abandoned, why were the readings so clean? Why did its hull show no scratches or stress marks? Why did the sensors pick up strong energy signatures that disappeared as quickly as they appeared? The technician was sweating now. He wasn't afraid, but the data made no sense. Machines were supposed to tell the truth. Machines didn't lie. And yet, every number flashing across the screen seemed to contradict the last dot in frustration. He switched to manual mode. This would bypass the automatic filters and display raw data exactly as the sensors captured it. No smoothing, no interpretation, just pure information. The raw stream appeared on the screen. It looked like a spill of symbols, curves, unfamiliar shapes, and overlapping sequences that didn't fit any known ship design. The technician's eyes narrowed. He tried to interpret the patterns. The commanders watched silently, waiting for answers. But the more he stared, the less he understood. The data wasn't messy. It was too clean, too organized. Each line of information looked deliberate, as if something on the human vessel wanted to be scanned in a very specific way, and yet nothing aligned with the laws of technology he knew. He zoomed in on one repeating pattern, hoping it would break apart into something recognizable. Instead, the symbol twisted into a new form, shifting as soon as the zoom changed. He zoomed out. It shifted again, like it was responding to him. He rubbed his temples, trying to steady his thoughts. "This isn't a malfunction," he whispered. "It's reacting." The commander didn't like the sound of that. He leaned closer, staring at the screen with narrowed eyes. He asked the technician to display the energy flux. The technician did so reluctantly. The graph shot upward in a sharp spike, then flattened instantly, as if someone had turned off the power inside the human vessel. The patrol ship's monitors dimmed at the same moment, causing several officers to jolt in surprise. The lights returned quickly, but the brief darkness felt unnatural. It wasn't a normal power dip. It was synchronized with the spike, almost too synchronized. The technician checked the readings again. His hands trembled slightly. "Sir, something on that ship is responding to our scans. But it's not defensive. It's almost like it's studying us back." A quiet pause fell over the deck. Even the commander had no ready answer for that dot. None of them thought the ship could be dangerous in a physical way. It wasn't firing anything. It wasn't moving. It wasn't trying to escape. It floated peacefully as if waiting for someone to understand it. But the data was wrong. Too wrong. The commander ordered one last test. Run a low-frequency pass. Something gentle. If it reacts again, shut down the scan immediately. The technician hesitated, but followed the order. The ship hummed softly as the low-frequency wave reached toward the drifting vessel like a quiet tap on a door dot as soon as The wave touched the ship. A pulse bounced back. It wasn't violent. It wasn't loud. It was just strange. The monitor shifted again, showing the interior layout of the human vessel for a brief moment. What they saw didn't match any human design. Rooms overlapped in impossible angles. Corridors twisted into curves that looped into themselves. The map showed shapes that shouldn't exist, structures that seemed more like ideas than physical rooms. Then the image vanished. The patrol ship's systems froze for half a second and restarted on their own. The technician stared at his panel in disbelief. He tried to recover the image, but it refused to return. No one spoke after that. They simply watched the human vessel drifting peacefully, unaware of the confusion it had caused. The commander finally broke the silence. He said the scan must be repeated later with better equipment, after reporting the irregularities. They had no reason to think the ship was hostile. But for the first time, even he felt a hint of unease that something was wrong. With that vessel, not threatening, not dangerous, just wrong. And none of them understood how deeply wrong it truly was. The deep scan had already caused more trouble than anyone expected, but the crew still tried to convince themselves that everything was normal. After all, machines could glitch, sensors could misread, and human ships, in their opinion, were always filled with strange signals anyway. Maybe it was nothing more than a confused system or a poorly shielded prototype drifting in the wrong place, but no one truly believed that. The patrol ship's main deck was unusually quiet. Usually, the crew talked during routines, joked lightly, or at least exchanged comments about readings. This time, everyone kept glancing at the drifting human vessel on the screen, even though it didn't move, even though it didn't send any alert or show any sign of danger. The silence around it felt unnatural. It felt like the ship was watching them, even though that wasn't possible. One of the officers who handled sensor reports tried to restart smaller background scans, the kind they used for identifying materials or checking hull density. These were safe, simple, nothing that could cause stress to the patrol ship systems. He tapped the console gently, as if being soft would make the sensors behave better. For a moment, everything worked. Numbers appeared normally. The data bars filled smoothly. The officer exhaled slowly, relieved that the system was finally responding. Maybe the earlier problems really had been nothing serious. But then, right when the readings reached halfway, the lines on the screen began to fade, then bend, then twist into shapes that made no sense at all. It wasn't random static. It was almost like something was rewriting the data in real time. Letters stretched into curves, numbers turned into symbols, and a straight line bent into a perfect loop without breaking. The officer leaned back in confusion. He tried canceling the scan, but the system didn't respond immediately. The button lit up, blinked, and then the console suddenly obeyed, resetting itself. When it rebooted, the screen was empty again. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't want to sound nervous or exaggerate. Instead, he quietly ran a diagnostic test. It came back clean. No faults, no overheating, no damage, according to the patrol ship's computer. Everything was running perfectly. That only made things feel stranger. In the corner of the deck, the communications operator attempted to send a standard identification request to the human vessel. It was a harmless message meant to ask, "Who are you? Please respond." Every species used some version of it, and human devices always answered eventually, even if their systems were old or slow. The operator sent the message and waited. The computer showed the signal leaving the ship cleanly, traveling straight toward the still vessel. The message should have bounced back almost instantly. Instead, nothing happened. The operator frowned and checked the output logs. The message had definitely sent, but no returning signal came through. It was as if the human vessel didn't hear it, or worse, heard it but refused to answer. He tried again. Still nothing. He adjusted the frequency slightly. Still no reply. Normally, the patrol crew would laugh and say the humans forgot to turn on their communication beacon. But after everything that had already happened, no one was in the mood to joke. A few meters away, the technician from earlier was back at his console, staring hard at the raw data he had saved before it vanished. He couldn't make sense of it. Every shape, every symbol, every repeating pattern didn't match anything in their database. Not one entry, not one similarity. It wasn't human tech, but it clearly came from the human vessel. He zoomed in again, hoping he had missed something. The more he stared, the more uneasy he felt. The pattern didn't break apart like normal data. It didn't reveal tiny fragments that explained what it meant. Instead, the moment he zoomed in, the pattern shifted again, just slightly, but enough to make it feel alive. He whispered quietly, "Why are you changing?" He wasn't speaking to the computer. He felt like he was speaking to the pattern itself. The commander noticed his troubled expression and walked over. He asked what the issue was, but the technician struggled to explain without sounding confused. Finally, he said in a low voice, "Sir, the data isn't stable. It reacts to how I look at it. Every time I zoom in, it changes. Every time I try to break it down, it becomes something new. It's like it doesn't want to be understood." The commander didn't like vague explanations. He asked if it could be some kind of human encryption, but the technician shook his head firmly. Encryption scrambled data to hide a message. This wasn't scrambled. This was too perfect. Like someone had created information that reorganized itself the moment someone tried to analyze it. The commander stared at the drifting human vessel again, trying to hide the pressure forming in his chest. He had seen strange ships before, experimental prototypes from dozens of worlds, secret research craft, even disguised transports. But nothing had ever behaved like this. He ordered the ship's AI to run a full system integrity check. It wasn't meant to find information. It was meant to protect their own systems in case something from outside was interfering. But when the AI began the check, the same thing that had happened earlier repeated. The lights dimmed slightly. Not enough to be dangerous, but enough to make every crew member glance upward. A soft ripple moved through the deck floor, as if the ship itself had taken a slow breath. Then, the AI stopped the scan and displayed an unexpected message. Unable to continue. Conflicting input detected. The commander frowned deeply. Conflicting input? From what? The AI restarted on its own, clearing the message before anyone could save a copy. When it came back online, it behaved as if nothing had happened. For the first time since the deep scan began, the commander felt something he rarely experienced: uncertainty. He was a strict leader, confident in his crew's abilities and in their technology. Yet everything around him hinted that they were in over their heads. The human vessel was still silent, still motionless, still drifting like a harmless object. But the impact it was having on the patrol ship grew heavier with every minute. A junior crew member on the left side of the deck suddenly spoke up. She had been monitoring small regular pulses, the harmless kind that most ships emitted from their engines or life support systems. She said she detected something unexpected, not a signal, not a message. Something more like a soft echo of their own scans being returned to them. It wasn't unusual for a ship to reflect scan waves. But the pattern of the reflection was not normal. It came back slightly delayed, slightly stretched, slightly changed. She described it as if the human vessel had absorbed the energy and then sent back something new. Not a copy, something transformed. Everyone paused. The technician quickly checked her readings. She wasn't mistaken. The reflected signal had a signature that didn't match anything they had sent. It was as if the human vessel had taken their scan apart and reassembled it before returning it. The commander's jaw tightened. He didn't want his crew to panic. He needed them thinking clearly. But even he couldn't ignore the pattern they were seeing. The human vessel wasn't just being scanned. It was responding. Not aggressively, not defensively, just intelligently, quietly, in a way that didn't fit any category they knew. He ordered all scans to stop completely. No more signals, no more pulses, no more attempts to read anything from the ship. The crew shut down every sensor aimed at the human vessel. The deck lights steadied. The hum softened to a normal tone. For a moment, everything felt almost peaceful. Again, but that peace lasted only a few seconds. As soon as the last sensor powered down, the main monitor flicked once, dimmed, and then displayed a single line of data that none of them had requested. Scan acknowledged. Everyone froze. The technician leaned forward slowly, afraid to breathe. He checked every log. He checked every outgoing message. No one had sent anything to the human vessel. No one had opened a channel. No one had typed a command that could have produced that line. It appeared by itself, and then it disappeared just as quietly. The screen returned to its original view, just the floating human vessel, still completely silent and still. The commander's voice was softer now. He didn't shout. He didn't demand. He simply told his crew to record everything carefully and avoid sending any new signals. Whatever the human vessel was, it wasn't behaving like a normal ship. None of them wanted to admit it out loud, but each person on the deck felt the same thing building inside them, an awareness that this was only the beginning. They had triggered something inside that vessel, and whatever it was, it had noticed them. The moment the human vessel acknowledged the scan, the patrol crew felt a subtle shift in the air. It was impossible to describe, but every person on the deck noticed it. The ship was still calm, drifting silently, but somehow the atmosphere felt heavier, like something unseen was pressing against their thoughts. None of them had experienced anything like this before. They had scanned hundreds of ships from dozens of species, some known for their experimental technology, but nothing had ever reacted like this. The commander took a deep breath. He had been trained to stay rational in all situations, but now, even he struggled. He gestured to the technician, asking for a careful reading of the last log. The technician nodded, still tense, and pulled up the raw data. What he saw made him freeze. The numbers, symbols, and curves that had previously shifted unpredictably now seemed alive. They flowed across the screen like water, sometimes separating into smaller patterns, then recombining into larger structures. It was as if the ship itself was thinking in shapes and sequences instead of words or numbers. He tapped the console, repeatedly trying to pause or isolate the patterns, but every time he touched the data, it reacted. Not violently, not aggressively, but as if it were aware of his actions. Every adjustment he made to view one part of the structure caused another part to change. It was impossible to study it in a normal way. The data refused to be pinned down. The commander, noticing the growing unease among the crew, spoke in a Foku, spoke in a Haida. Low, steady voice. Step back. Everyone stop interacting with the consoles. Observe only, nothing else. He didn't want panic to spread, and he didn't want anyone's curiosity to trigger something they couldn't control. His instincts told him that the human vessel was far beyond anything they understood, and that caution was the only option. The crew complied. Fingers hovered over controls, eyes glued to the screens, each one holding their breath. Even the ship's AI, which usually maintained calm efficiency, paused slightly as though it sensed the same tension. For a few minutes, there was silence except for the soft hum of the patrol ship's engines. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the raw data on the main console began to pulse. The pulse wasn't a threat. There was no energy surge, no alarm, no sudden spike in readings. But the shapes on the screen stretched and folded rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Each movement seemed deliberate. Each shift seemed intentional. The crew realized that whatever the human vessel contained, it was responding not physically, but intellectually. The ship was communicating through patterns that no one had ever been taught to read. One of the younger officers leaned toward the console, curiosity overcoming caution. He whispered, "Is it trying to tell us something?" His words hung in the air. No one answered. Speaking aloud seemed almost wrong in that moment, like breaking a silent pact with something greater than they understood. The shapes continued to fold and pulse, their patterns becoming more intricate with every second. The technician tried again to run a simple diagnostic. He thought if he could just understand a small fragment of the data, he could report it. But the moment he initiated the scan, the console flickered violently. Numbers, symbols, and curves ran together like ink in water, then separated into sequences that were impossible to predict. The diagnostic system itself began producing contradictory results. Parts of the patrol ship's own systems began reporting errors that didn't exist. The technician realized with growing dread that the human vessel wasn't just responding. It was interacting with their ship's systems without physically touching anything. The commander noticed the subtle flicker of lights across the deck. Not dangerous, but unsettling. He ordered the ship's AI to maintain full observation, but no further scanning. The AI complied, but it too seemed affected. Its status reports became fragmented. Some sensors reported high energy readings, others reported none. It was as if the human vessel had inserted something into their systems that changed the way their instruments perceived reality. Minutes passed like hours. The crew alternated between fascination and unease. They had encountered strange technology before, but nothing had ever challenged their understanding of perception itself. The human vessel seemed harmless on the surface, yet the data it produced could not be contained, could not be fully observed, and could not be ignored. Every attempt to study it triggered new, unpredictable responses. It was intelligent, but not in any way they had ever known intelligence to exist. Then, without warning, a single image appeared on the main console. It was fleeting, lasting only a second, but it left every officer staring in disbelief. The screen displayed a representation of their own patrol ship, but not as it existed physically. The image was layered with impossible angles, shapes that should not have fit together, corridors looping into themselves, consoles stretching and bending. It was as though the human vessel had created a reflection of them through its own understanding, showing them a version of reality that was simultaneously familiar and impossible. The younger officer, who had whispered earlier, gasped. "It's showing us ourselves," he murmured. His voice trembled, though there was no fear, only awe. The patterns continued to shift, forming abstract representations of the crew, the ship, and even the patrol ship's instruments. Shapes were not threatening. They were thoughtful, intentional, a reflection, but also a lesson that their minds could not fully grasp. The technician tried to save the image, to analyze it, but the moment he attempted to copy it, the console reverted to raw data. The patterns began to rearrange themselves again, as though the act of capturing them had been noticed and corrected. The crew realized that any attempt to dominate, control, or fully understand this information was impossible. The human vessel was not only advanced, it was self-protective in ways they could not predict. It had rules and boundaries encoded into its existence, and it would enforce them silently, subtly, and without threat. Hours seemed to pass. The crew alternated between fascination, confusion, and exhaustion. None of them spoke much. They watched. They recorded. They attempted to remain rational, even as their instruments and perceptions continued to challenge every assumption they had ever held. The human vessel was calm, silent, and yet profoundly present. It was as though it existed simultaneously in multiple layers of understanding, each layer more intricate than the last, and each layer reacting to their presence in a thoughtful, deliberate way. Finally, the commander spoke again. "We cannot scan further. We cannot force understanding. All we can do is observe and record." His voice was firm, but there was a note of humility that no one had heard from him before. He had spent decades commanding patrol ships, dealing with countless unknowns, and nothing had ever humbled him like this. He realized in that moment that some forms of intelligence, some forms of technology, could not be approached with the usual rules. They required respect, patience, and acknowledgement of limits that the patrol crew had never needed to consider before. As the human vessel drifted silently, the crew settled into careful observation. They recorded patterns, captured fragments, and noted changes in their instruments, but they did so with restraint. They understood now that their curiosity could provoke responses that they were not equipped to handle. The vessel had not harmed them physically, but it had demonstrated a level of control and awareness that far exceeded anything they had known. The human craft was not just a ship. It was a presence, a conscious entity that required understanding. On its own terms, by the end of their watch cycle, every officer on the patrol ship had felt a quiet respect for the human vessel. It was not hostile. It did not attack. It did not flee. Yet it had made its intelligence clear in the most subtle, undeniable way possible. It could influence the world around it without force, simply through the depth of its design and the responsiveness of its systems. The crew realized they were in the presence of something profoundly beyond their understanding, something that challenged not only their technology, but their very concept of what intelligence could be. As the patrol ship prepared to return to normal operations, the commander ordered one final recording of the vessel before leaving the area. The console captured a brief pulse of patterns, rhythmic and precise, that faded almost immediately after the recording started. The technician carefully saved the data, aware that no analysis would fully explain what they had seen. They had glimpsed something alive in the information itself, and that glimpse had already changed the way they would think about human vessels forever. For a moment, the deck was silent, each officer contemplating what had happened. They had approached the human vessel expecting simplicity, or at most, an ordinary prototype. Instead, they had found something that operated on a level they could not comprehend, a quiet intelligence that used data, patterns, and responses instead of weapons or defenses. They had learned that not all threats were physical, and not all intelligence was immediately obvious. Some things existed to be understood, but only on their own terms. The commander took a deep breath and finally spoke. "We leave it as it is. No scans, no pulses, no attempts to interfere. Record what you can, observe what you can, but do not touch it again." The crew nodded. None of them questioned the order. They understood, finally, that this human vessel was something extraordinary. Something. The patrol crew had spent hours observing the human vessel. By now, their instruments were functioning normally, but the memory of what they had seen kept each officer alert. The vessel itself remained calm, still drifting through space, yet the knowledge of its capabilities lingered like an invisible weight. It was not aggressive, but it had a presence that left a deep impression on everyone aboard the patrol ship. Even the commander, who had faced countless emergencies and unknown threats in his career, felt a quiet unease. He had studied strange vessels before, some of which had caused serious damage or required complex negotiations, but nothing had ever challenged him like this. The human ship had not attacked them. It had not fired weapons. It had not tried to escape. Yet through the patterns and sequences it displayed. It had conveyed intelligence and awareness far beyond anything they had encountered. It was as if the vessel itself was alive, not in a biological sense, but in a way that could manipulate data, perception, and understanding. One officer, sitting slightly apart from the others, kept glancing at the console where the vessel's data had briefly been displayed. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "It isn't just a ship. It's something else." No one responded. They were all thinking the same thing. The human vessel had done something the crew had never expected. It had made them realize that some forms of intelligence could exist in ways they had never imagined. It had forced them to confront the limits of their own understanding. The technician who had been studying the raw data earlier tried to organize what they had captured. He compared the patterns from the last scan with earlier sequences. At first, nothing matched, but gradually he noticed a rhythm, subtle but deliberate. It was as if the human vessel had not only responded to their scans, but had anticipated them. Every adjustment the crew made, every attempt to observe without interfering, was mirrored in the sequences the vessel displayed. It was not random, and it was not chaotic. It was intelligent, patient, and precise. The commander gathered the crew for a brief discussion. He spoke calmly, but there was a tension in his voice that he could not hide. "We need to understand one thing clearly," he said. "We are not in control here. This vessel is not ours to study on our terms. Any further attempt to force understanding could provoke something we do not comprehend. For now, observation and caution are our only options." The crew nodded, though the weight of the command settled heavily on them. They had entered this mission expecting a routine scan. They had expected confusion from human technology, perhaps some minor irregularities. But this was different. This was a level of awareness that transcended ordinary design. The vessel had made its intelligence clear without using force, without threatening harm, and without asking for anything. It was quiet, deliberate, and profoundly beyond their comprehension. As they continued to monitor the vessel, the officer who had first noticed the reflection-like sequences spoke again. "I keep thinking about what we saw," he said. "The way it showed our ship. It wasn't trying to hurt us. It was just showing us itself. Or maybe showing us what we could not see." His words hung in the air, and for a moment the crew simply listened. None of them tried to respond. There was nothing to respond to, nothing that could adequately explain the experience. The technician leaned over his console, fingers hovering above the controls. He wanted to analyze the sequences further, to understand the patterns, but he knew that every attempt could change them. It was not a simple task. The data was not fixed. It was fluid, alive in its own way, and resistant to interference. He realized that the human vessel had set the terms of interaction, and that their usual methods of study were inadequate. To approach it the wrong way could erase everything they had observed. Hours passed. The crew rotated through observation. Shifts, documenting every change, every pulse, every movement of the patterns on the console. Despite their best efforts, no one could fully interpret the sequences. They were structured, deliberate, and consistent in their own way, but completely outside the parameters of anything the crew had learned. It was intelligence without a familiar form, awareness without a recognizable mind. The human vessel had created a presence that existed entirely on its own terms. During one quiet moment, the commander spoke privately with the technician. "Do you think it knows we are thinking about it?" he asked. The technician hesitated. He had thought about this himself. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't need to. What we do know is that it responds. To us, but not in the ways we expect. It doesn't attack. It doesn't flee. It simply exists, and we are aware of it." The commander nodded. He understood that trying to force understanding could be dangerous, even if the vessel was not physically harmful. Their instruments had already shown signs of influence. The vessel's intelligence was subtle, pervasive, and undeniable. It had proven that it could manipulate perception, patterns, and data in ways that humans, or any species the patrol crew, had known could not anticipate. To push further without care could risk more than their understanding. It could risk their minds, or at least the clarity of thought needed to operate their ship. Later, during a routine check of the ship's sensors, another officer noticed that the human vessel seemed to reflect their own observation patterns. Whenever a console was adjusted, the sequences on the human vessel changed slightly. It was not aggressive, but it was aware. It was responding to the crew's attention, not to commands, not to physical actions, but to thought, intention, and observation. The officer described it as if the vessel could read their curiosity, a statement met with quiet agreement from others on the deck. They had never encountered anything capable of such subtle interaction. The realization settled over the crew like a weight. This human vessel was not just advanced. It was a new form of intelligence, one that used its design, its data, and its presence to communicate and interact without physical force. It required respect, patience, and acknowledgement of limits. Any attempt to dominate it, force it to reveal its structure, or manipulate could have unknown consequences. They had to learn restraint, something many officers had not practiced in decades of exploration and patrol. As the observation continued, a calm understanding emerged among the crew. They recorded what they could, documented every shift in the patterns, and noted the subtle responses to their presence. They maintained distance, both physically and intellectually, allowing the vessel to exist without interference. In doing so, they discovered a form of communication that did not require words, gestures, or traditional signals. The human vessel conveyed awareness, intelligence, and presence in the most extraordinary way, by simply existing and responding naturally to observation. Hours turned into more hours, and the crew grew increasingly aware of how profoundly the vessel challenged their understanding. The human species, often underestimated, had produced something that redefined intelligence and interaction. The vessel did not need to attack, defend, or escape. It only needed to exist, and through its existence, it communicated more than any words or displays could convey. It revealed the limitations of the crew's understanding and the extraordinary potential of human innovation. The commander, watching his crew's reactions, realized that this encounter would change them permanently. Even the most experienced officers, who had faced countless dangers and mysteries, were humbled by the quiet, deliberate intelligence of the human vessel. It had shown them that power, awareness, and intelligence could exist without aggression, without noise, and without force. It had demonstrated that true understanding required patience, observation, and humility. By the end of their observation shift, every crew member felt a mix of awe and respect. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that defied conventional definitions of intelligence. They understood now that the human species could create tools and vessels that operated on levels they had not imagined possible. These vessels were more than machines. They were living extensions of thought, design, and awareness. As the patrol ship prepared to continue its routine, the commander issued one final order. We leave it be. We record what we can. We observe. Quietly, we do not interfere. Any further contact without extreme caution is forbidden. The crew obeyed silently, each officer carrying a quiet understanding of the lesson they had learned. The human vessel remained still, silent, and unthreatening. Yet it had left an indelible impression. It had challenged everything the patrol crew believed about technology, intelligence, and the limits of observation. And in that calm, deliberate presence, they realized a profound truth. Humans, often underestimated and overlooked, were capable of creating wonders far beyond what any other species could predict. Even as the patrol ship continued on its course, the crew could not stop thinking about what they had witnessed. The human vessel had not attacked them, had not interfered with their ship, and had not displayed hostility in any way. It had simply existed, responding subtly and deliberately to observation, revealing an intelligence that was both extraordinary and impossible to ignore. They understood, finally, that their encounter had changed them. They had glimpsed something extraordinary. They had glimpsed human ingenuity at its most remarkable, and they knew they would never forge. The patrol ship had spent hours, almost a full cycle, observing the human vessel. By now, every officer knew that this encounter was unlike anything they had faced before. They had come expecting a simple, routine scan. They had anticipated strange readings, minor confusion, and perhaps some technical surprises. But the reality had been far beyond their expectations. The human vessel had revealed intelligence that was quiet, subtle, and yet profoundly powerful. It did not attack, it did not flee, and it did not threaten. It simply existed, responding to their observations in ways they could barely comprehend. The crew moved slowly through their routine. Each step, each gesture, was measured and careful, almost as if they were walking around a living being. Though the human vessel appeared calm and unthreatening, its presence was so overwhelming in its quiet intelligence that even the commander found himself feeling cautious. It was not fear, exactly, but deep respect. Something about the vessel made them aware of how small and limited their understanding truly was. The technician, sitting at his console, continued analyzing fragments of data they had managed to capture. Despite their best efforts, no amount of calculation, comparison, or deconstruction could fully explain the sequences. The patterns twisted, folded, and responded in ways that made conventional logic seem insufficient. It was not chaos. It was far too organized. And yet it was something no one had ever encountered before. It was as if the human vessel contained thought, creativity, and awareness, all embedded in the way it existed and interacted with the patrol ship. One officer, who had been quiet for hours, finally spoke. "It doesn't just respond," he said. "Slowly. It adapts to us, not in a hostile way, but like it understands what we're doing before we do it." His voice was soft, but every eye on the deck turned toward him. No one argued. They all felt it. Every adjustment, every attempt to observe, every subtle glance at the console seemed to provoke a small, precise reaction from the human vessel. It was not manipulation in a forceful sense. It was awareness in its purest form. The commander nodded. "That's exactly what makes this encounter different. It's not just technology. It's something more. And we cannot force understanding. Not now, not ever, if we are not careful." His words hung in the air. The crew understood. They had already pushed too far earlier, and each interaction had subtly changed the way their instruments and perceptions responded. It was clear that the human vessel set the rules. They could watch, they could record, they could learn, but they could not control it. As the observation continued, the patrol ship's crew began to notice subtler things. The way the vessel's patterns responded seemed almost deliberate. Each shift, each pulse, each small transformation of the sequences conveyed intent. It was not random, but it was not a message in the way they had expected either. It was an awareness communicated in patterns, not words. The vessel was telling them something without saying it. And the more the crew studied the sequences, the more they understood that it was teaching them without directly teaching them, guiding them toward understanding without forcing comprehension. The hours passed slowly, and the crew rotated through their observation shifts. Each person returned from the main deck with the same mixture of awe, curiosity, and humility. They had seen the vessel's intelligence at work and understood that humans had created something extraordinary. It was not just engineering skill. It was insight, creativity, and awareness, all embedded in the way the vessel existed and responded. No other species they had encountered had produced something like this. The commander decided it was time to document everything carefully. He gathered the crew together and asked them to compile notes, screenshots, and recordings, but he emphasized caution. We record. We observe. We do not interfere. We let it exist as it is. Our understanding is limited, and any interference could change everything. The crew nodded. They had learned restraint the hard way, and they understood that patience was as important as curiosity. While they documented, the technician continued exploring the patterns on his console, now more carefully and quietly. He noticed that some sequences reflected the patrol ship itself, not physically, but in the way the vessel's data responded. It was as if the human vessel had created a mirror, showing them a representation of their own ship, but through its unique intelligence. The reflection was not exact, but it captured essence, how the ship moved, how the crew operated, how their instruments interacted with the environment. For a moment, the technician understood something profound. The vessel could reflect awareness itself, teaching them to observe and comprehend in ways that went beyond simple science or logic. The commander, watching the crew, realized that their experience had changed them. Even the most experienced officers, who had faced countless unknowns in space, now approached observation with humility. They had been reminded that intelligence, creativity, and understanding could exist in forms far beyond what they had imagined. The human vessel had not fought them, threatened them, or hidden from them. It had existed quietly, and in doing so, it had reshaped their perceptions, their understanding, and even the way they thought about life, technology, and awareness. As the patrol ship began its gradual retreat, keeping a respectful distance, the crew could not stop thinking about what they had seen. The human vessel drifted silently, calm and unassuming, yet it had left a profound impact on every observer. They had learned that power and intelligence did not always come from force or dominance. Sometimes they came from thought, design, and quiet awareness. The vessel had demonstrated that humans, despite being underestimated by most species, had the capacity to create wonders that challenged the universe itself. The technician finally spoke aloud, breaking the quiet. It's not just a ship, it's alive in a way we've never understood. And it's human. They made it. His voice was filled with awe, but also with respect. The crew nodded silently. Every officer felt the truth of his words. They had encountered a form of intelligence that did not need weapons, energy beams, or speed to assert its presence. It existed in patterns, in observation, and in its subtle awareness. That was its power, and it was something no one could ignore. As the patrol ship turned toward the edge of the sector, the commander spoke once more. We will report what we observed, but we must be careful. We cannot describe it fully, because no words will do it justice. We cannot explain the intelligence, the awareness, the subtle responses. All we can do is record, observe, and respect it. And we must remember, the humans have created something extraordinary, something that challenges every assumption we've ever had about technology, intelligence, and awareness. The crew continued their work quietly, recording final observations and double-checking logs. The human vessel remained in view until the patrol ship reached the limit of the observation zone. Even then, it drifted silently, calm and unaffected, as if aware of their departure, but uninterested in their movement. The officers could not stop watching, even as they moved farther away. They had glimpsed something unique, something that would remain in their minds long after the encounter ended. By the time they had returned to standard patrol routines, every officer understood that the human vessel had changed them. They had learned that intelligence and creativity could exist in forms they could not fully comprehend. They had learned that some designs were not meant to be dominated, only observed and respected. And they had learned that humans, often underestimated and overlooked, could create wonders far beyond what most species imagined possible. In private conversations later, officers spoke cautiously about what they had seen. They agreed silently on one point. No report, no description, no dataset could fully convey the experience. Words were insufficient. Symbols, patterns, and sequences could only hint at the intelligence contained within the human vessel. And even those hints were enough to challenge every assumption about what humans were capable of. As the patrol ship moved further into space, leaving the human vessel behind, the commander allowed himself a quiet reflection. He had seen many things in his career, but this encounter was different. It was not a battle. It was not a rescue. It was not even a scientific breakthrough in the traditional sense. It was an experience of intelligence, creativity, and awareness in its purest, most extraordinary form. And it had come from humanity, a species the galaxy had long underestimated. The crew quietly accepted the reality that they had been changed by the encounter. They had witnessed something profound, something that demanded respect, observation, and patience. They had glimpsed intelligence without force, awareness without aggression, and design without limitation. And they knew, deep in their hearts, that the human species had the potential to shape the universe in ways they could barely imagine. As the sector stars stretched past their viewports, the crew recorded the final notes, captured the last sequences of data, and prepared to move on with their patrol. Yet none of them could forget the quiet, deliberate presence of the human vessel. They knew that somewhere in space, it continued to drift, existing on its own terms, responding subtly, and reminding the galaxy that humans were capable of extraordinary, unimaginable achievements. And in that silent drifting, they understood a truth that would remain with them forever. Pow!